Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide in this journey. And today we're going to be discussing about the role of art therapy in psychedelic preparation and integration with Charmaine Husum. Charmaine is a registered art therapist, somatic counselor, and Kundalini yoga teacher with over 12 years of experience supporting psychedelic preparation and integration. Her courses train professionals globally using specifically developed protocols in trauma-informed harm reduction practices with her book, Psychedelics and Art Therapy, a trauma-informed manual for somatic self expression, endorsed by numerous experts in the field, including Stan and Brigitte Grof. Now, before we get to Charmaine, just a reminder that the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here is to be construed as medical or legal advice. And one last reminder, if you are a clinician and you'd like to learn more about psychedelics, please check out the Psychedelic Medicine Association. It is our mission to get you up to speed so that you feel comfortable discussing psychedelics with your patients because we know they're asking the questions and even referring when appropriate. If you'd like to learn more, please check us out at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Now, without further ado, thanks so much for joining us today, Charmaine.
Thank you, Lynn Marie. So lovely to be here with you.
I'm really interested. I promised listeners, I was probably a year and a half ago that I would do this adjunct series, and we did one on somatic therapy and how that could be helpful. And then this is our second adjunct, and so I promised a series. I didn't promise it would be serially. In this, there may be a year separating them, but I'm very excited to get to this conversation. And if you could just start us off by telling us what is art therapy and what does it entail?
Yeah, so art therapy is an approach to psychotherapy. I think it's important to name as we begin that there's a difference between art therapy and art as therapy. So many would say that making art helps them feel better. It supports mental health in ways. And it absolutely does, right? It's fantastic to allow one's creative expression, to have voice and be in that space. But that's different than art therapy. So art therapy is using clinical approaches overlaid with the creative process in order to get to the root of a problem, really. And so what we're doing is we're allowing the unconscious to move from within us to outside of us. And we're creating space between what we might feel within and now what is outside of us, so that we're able now to process what we see outside of us rather than creating a dialogue and a story about what we feel inside. So it can really help that way to get to the root of a problem by just visualizing it outside of oneself. It's not about making art, actually. It's about being in the present moment, about moving materials, about allowing for often a cathartic release, and giving expression for what we often don't have words for.
And what kinds of art are frequently used in art therapy?
Well, it's interesting. The area I work in is with trauma. And so what's especially important for me in my work is offering choice to the clients that I work with. And so what that means is that many materials will be available. So I find it's important to have a variety of materials, of colors of paper, sizes, thicknesses of paper. The type of materials used are often, I like to use things that are often water-based. So something you can add water to that often helps evoke more emotion when we're using water. So we may want a material though that we have more control over when we're not quite ready to move into those emotional spaces. So maybe something like pencil crayons or markers, where then there's also the option of maybe paints or chalk pastels, things that can get a little messier when we're exploring maybe deeper feelings or when we're feeling safe to open up to those feelings. So it could be clay, it could be collage, really anything goes. Natural materials. Yeah, we're just using that as a tool to get to the root of what's happening for us and healing.
Very cool. I imagine clay would just be like a fun medium to use with the caveat that the one time I tried the spinning wheel clay thing, it made me very anxious because if you've ever tried that, if you get it wrong, all of a sudden your thing is flying off. So maybe not that version of clay, but I'm just trying to, because I've never had art therapy. So I'm learning right along with all the listeners in this as to what kinds of possibilities there are. So thank you for the explanation. Let's move into how can art therapy be used in preparation for a psychedelic experience?
Well, as far as preparation goes, because I work with people both in preparation and integration, um, and I've created kind of protocols that I've found worked with the clients that I've worked with, over the last over 10 years now. And so within preparation, one of the key components or the key activities I do with one is working more transpersonally or inviting one to access a sense of empowerment within before we move into the medicine. So I'll often do that through meditation, through a brief meditation, and then invite one to create an image, a representation of what strength feels like inside. So depending on who I'm working with, I may use different words for that. We may call that their essence, their self energy, if I'm using an IFS lens, their spirit, their soul even. And so when they're able to then take that feeling they've had inside or an experience through meditation and put it outside of themselves, now they have something to work with when they go into the medicine work, which can be very destabilizing. So there's this visceral memory of empowerment that they have inside of them. Now outside of them, they can bring that image with them to their medicine journey, or it can just come up in their memories. And we use that moving forward too, almost like a resource image or a talisman even, to bring one back to that sense of inner strength.
Oh, that's very interesting. So, one aspect of how you use art therapy in preparation is preparing them for the actual experience, how it may be challenging. I'm assuming that you also probably have components where you use it to help them set an intention.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's another way that I would use art therapy is to set an intention, allowing again for that experience to come through either talk therapy at the beginning using clinical approaches, and then inviting that feeling that they have inside with the intention, the feeling around the intention or felt sense, now to be expressed outside of themselves. And it's interesting too, art therapy isn't just about making the art, it's about processing the art afterwards. So when I'm working with someone in preparation, and especially if someone has experienced traumas or things that they're wanting to work through in their medicine journey, we will then allow for sessions to navigate these pieces, to build strengths around them before moving into the journey itself. And so the processing, what happens is once the art's created, we put it up on, I have like a billboard I'll work with, right? Or an easel that we can create space between them and the art. And I'll check with them, like, how does it feel in your body to have this space? Do you need more? Do you need less? Do we want to turn the art upside down? How does that feel? And then we move out from there though. So I may ask questions like, where does your eye move to first? And we expand from there then using a phenomenological approach with metaphor. And I'll ask the questions like, what memories come up for you when you look at that one area on the top left-hand corner you named as your eye going to first, when you look at that, say, red square box? And so from there, we open it up to further exploration of what does a red square box mean? How old do they feel that the person that would have created that is? And so that, again, just allows us to move deeper into the clinical approaches that we're using within art therapy.
Interesting. Do your clients ever bring what they created into the ceremony with them?
Yes, absolutely. Most of them do bring an image of what they've created, or they might already have it on their phone. They may journal with it just before ceremony to kind of reset that intention. But yeah, it can definitely be a helpful tool for them to ground. Because again, as I said, when we're moving into these non-ordinary states of consciousness that can be so disruptive for many who are working through healing trauma. We need to have that focal point within. And so not only with the art therapy, but I invite a regular meditation practice too before journeying, so that one is able to feel an anchor, a strength inside themselves, and then sit with the medicine. And what I've found is that we're able to go deeper into our medicine journey when we have these tools before we begin.
Yeah, I think I love that you bring up the whole like the accessing strength. I recall, I mean, one of my first major experiences was with ayahuasca, and the person says beforehand, you can ask us for help, but just know that you have what you need. And obviously, there are situations where somebody is maybe definitely having some kind of emergency and they do need to ask for help. But I remember there was a time when I was going to ask for help and I remembered you have what you need. And I was able to like kind of ground back in. And so people might think like, oh, you don't remember that when you're in an altered state. But I think there are times when you definitely can call back to that, like that preparation phase.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're developing a relationship to that part within us, right? As we access it and as we continue to access it. So even not just with using psychedelics, all of my clients, I will invite to develop a relationship to their inner strength. So when they are out in the world and feel dysregulated, there's that memory like, wait a sec, that is inside me. I can get through this. So
Yeah, I love that. And in your book, you also discuss further techniques about how you can use art therapy in the grounding process, maybe afterward. As they, coming back from, there's that period where things are still a little ethereal and esoteric. How can it play a role there?
yeah, absolutely. In that liminal space, right? We're actually extending that space of our journey when we create immediately afterwards. And so the way that can play a role there, I find, well, to start off, what I've created, like what I've found in working with people is there's really specific stages and steps we need to work through in the integration process in order to fully kind of assimilate the medicine. Otherwise, what ends up happening is we continue going outside of ourselves for healing, right? Whether that's finding the next guru or finding the next ceremony or what it is, where the medicine has opened up a window inside of us. And I know people talk about this with integration, but still we see integration as a couple of sessions afterwards, or, maybe a group talk session and circle afterwards. But really, it's a process, if that's available to one, to really take the medicine journey, the healing journey, to that next level where the healing's coming from within. So, yeah, I'll start with grounding, right? Because what many describe when we move through these medicine ceremonies, we move from one state of consciousness to another so quickly, we can really feel dysregulated afterwards. And especially when things have been shaken up enough that we're wanting to make huge changes in life, right? We need to settle down and ground. So the way I introduce that with the art therapy is with a grounding meditation, walking outside in nature, grabbing natural materials, and creating some sort of collage with that, coming back to our safe space, wherever it is in our home or wherever we are, if it's a retreat center, wherever, coming back to our place to create a collage can be helpful for the grounding. The next stage I would move into is creating safety or remembering safety and strengthening our resources. So also I should say the protocols I use really follow Judith Herman's 3 stages of trauma therapy. So she was one of the first psychologists to create kind of protocols around working with trauma. She was very influential in Bessel van der Kolk's work and did work with him. But so she has 3 stages of trauma therapy, which is grounding and stabilizing, connecting to the experience, and then lastly would be connecting to others to make sense of our experience. So the next stage I would move into is creating safety and invite an art therapy exercise I do with people to create an image or a representation, a three-dimensional representation of what safety feels like. So that's often a doll or some kind of character that you can put on your mantle as that reminder of a resource that you have. But I keep it open too. So I'm not saying specifically, this is what I want you to do. I think we need to give people choice, and so that they're able to decide what feels right for them after their experience. So, and then, yeah, the next stage I would move into then would be connecting to the spirit of the experience. So working transpersonally. And it's my belief from my own work with, especially entheogens, and plant medicines is that these medicines have a spirit. There's something more to them, is what my experience has been, whether that is psychedelic medicines or non-psychedelic plant medicines, where that now lives within someone. And so connecting to that can be a support as well. So that would be the next stage I would move into. Yeah, just inviting someone to kind of take inventory of their life of when they have felt support. Did you want me to continue going through them? There's 9 stages. I think I'm at the 5th one now.
Sure, why not? I'm interested how like the actual art process is in each of these,
Yeah.
this is okay. All right, continue.
Okay. So the next stage that we would move into an integration using art therapy. And again, this is somatic art therapy. So we're also working with the body, sensations in the body, how to allow those to come to the surface to be expressed. And so the next stage we move into an integration is falling in love with oneself, really allowing self-acceptance to be felt, to be expressed. And I use a couple different art directives for this stage. One is working with mandalas, right, which Stan and Brigitte Grof had used with the holotropic breath work. And they had worked with an art therapist, Joan Kellogg, in the 60s that actually developed that process of using mandala work within holotropic breath work. So we use mandalas as a reflection of self. And then I use another art directive, which I find really quite interesting in what it brings up, is a non-dominant hand self-portrait. So, right, whenever we're using our non-dominant hand, we're accessing kind of the opposite side of our brain, or the usually a more creative side, right? If we're using our left hand rather than our right. But either way, we're allowing that thinking process to pause. And also our expectations are quite low if we're doing a self-portrait with our non-dominant hand. And so what I find with people after this process is a real surprise that, wow, it looks a lot better than I thought it would. And so that allows just an opening for us to accept ourselves a little bit deeper. So, there's also meditations that I invite people to use throughout these stages. But as far as art goes, that's the 5th stage. The 6th one is understanding our attachment styles. And again, I've noticed this to be, a theme in the people I work with in integration. This comes up. Not just what one's attachment style is, but how they got there. What happened in their first 7 years of life for that to happen? What processing do we need to do now with the arts, with the psychotherapy, the somatic work, in order to allow for a healing and understanding of that? And the art then that I use for that, the directive I use is inviting one to map out all of their past relationships. And I keep that open. Like if they want to do it with collage images, if they want to draw each image, if they want to write it down, just somehow showing a map of what your relationships have been and how they've affected you today. And so there can be a lot of healing that happens when we're looking at those relationships, because they're both positive and ones that have been unsupportive. So then the 7th step we move into is, and again, this is following those 3 stages of trauma therapy by Judith Herman, is creating healthy connections. So now moving out into the world, noticing how we can create healthy connections, speaking about things like and understanding things like boundaries, doing some deeper inner child work, and ways to reparent ourselves as well in this stage. And the art directive I use, and you may have seen parts of this. A similar art directive was shown, highlighted in National Geographic, maybe about 10 years ago, with working with veterans with trauma, which is using masks. So I offer two forms of this art directive, either a mask or a box. And on the outside of the mask or a box, we place images of what we want people to see us as, or what we think people see us as. And so the box art directive is called an inside-outside box. And so it's similar for the mask, though, where on the inside of the mask or the inside of the box, we place images, and we often use collage, but we can also use art materials, images, or we create on the inside what we keep close to our heart. So these may be parts we don't share because we still have shame over. It may be parts that we don't feel people would understand, but things that are a little closer to our heart, that we're not ready to share with the world. And the idea of this directive is, how do we kind of allow some of the inside pieces to show on the outside? And how can we bring those outside expectations to the inside as well? So to fully integrate. The next stage is the eighth stage, goes a little bit deeper, where we start looking, now that we've set the foundation, we've worked through these pieces to build up these resources inside, because the psychedelics have opened up this window and we're walking right through it to do this deeper inner work. The next stage is integrating our shadow side and doing some of that deeper shadow work. So there's many different ways I work with people in order to allow this process to happen. Something I find extremely powerful, though, is working with black paper. So it's interesting when we're working with black paper, because usually if we're working with a light colored paper, we're creating shadows. But when we're working with a darker paper, we're only creating highlights, right? The paper itself is the shadow. So it allows us to move a little deeper into looking at shadow. And again, it's not this specific directive, this is what you do to work on shadow work. When you're working with an art therapist, there's a process we do throughout. Yes. So yeah, that would be the art directive. There's a couple I use there too, where I might even invite someone. And again, if we're doing shadow work, we're also doing resource work. So like I said, in that preparatory stage where we create an image of what a resource looks like and feels like within us, when we're doing shadow work, we have to be careful that we're not opening what I believe it's Peter Levine describes as the trauma vortex. So we don't want to dive into something that we're not able to hold. So what I often invite before we do the shadow work is to create, doing again that art directive of creating a resource. And so we can then look at what we've created with our shadow work. And sometimes even using bilateral eye movements. If one is getting dysregulated, I'll invite them to look to the resource image and now back to the shadow image, and then to the resource and back to the shadow image can be helpful. Because yeah, like I said, we want to be able to create a healing vortex as well. So we're dipping our toes into that shadow vortex, but we're not being pulled into the trauma vortex. So then the final stage is, the ninth stage is choosing your own life, right? And really a focus on, what do we want? What has this experience with the medicine done for us as we move forward? What's going to support us? So I invite a lot of narrative therapy with this, some journaling, some dialoguing with oneself. And the art directive I use in this stage, and again, I move them around often, but typically the art directive I use is one I learned way back when in school by a woman named Monica Carpendale at the Kundalini Art Therapy Institute. And she loved working with fairy tales. There's so much information we can get about ourselves when we put ourselves in a fairy tale. So then I invite the client I'm working with to create their life as a fairy tale. And again, this was a directive that Monica Carpendale had first shared with me. And yeah, I've used it even personally a bunch of times, and it's amazing what we can work through. When we look at who is the villain, who's the heroine, what is the story that is being solved, what is the mystery, what are the tools that we gain along the way. So that's the final stage of the integration work I do with art therapy.
I love it. Thank you so much for going through all of those. I really appreciate it. And I had some thoughts come up. Do you have clients that you're working with that I imagine some may be like you when you brought up the whole non-dominant hand drawing and you thought how your expectations are low. Are there times when the client is so kind of overly anxious about the appearance of their art that it interferes with the process? Like, how do you get people comfortable who may not be used to creating any art?
Mm, yeah, absolutely. That can come up, right? And that's information for the art therapist as well. That okay, we're working with a perfectionist part as well, and where does that come from? And usually, when that part is showing up, there's a lot of work to be done with self-esteem and self-acceptance. And so I would start slowly, right? Then I would switch the process a little bit to maybe use materials that might not bring up such a feeling of it needing to be perfect. I would probably bring out some collage images at that point. So one's not needing to create what they see, but rather find images that represent something that they're feeling. And often with collage, it's not about finding the perfect image. It's about just having a sense that an image means something, whether or not we know what it means. So in our therapy, something we kind of often say is we trust the process. We trust if the mark being made, if there's a mistake, well, there are no mistakes because that's going to give us information. And we're not needing to decipher anything as it's being made. We'll do that afterwards when we process it. Right now, we're just moving materials. So yeah, I think in that instance, what I usually normally do is I'll give them materials that allow for more free expression. Maybe I'll say, okay, let's finger paint or use clay, right? Let's just squeeze the clay and talk right now then and see how that feels.
Very cool. I love that. Oh, are there certain let's say instead of conditions, but we can either conditions or just mental states of being that you found lend themselves well to patients who have those conditions or those mental states working with art therapy?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, what that brings up for me is those that some for not everybody enjoys working this way, right? Some people that are really cerebral, kind of left brain orientated, it can be difficult working in this way because yeah, it's a lot of right brain work, right? And what we're doing is actually integrating the right and left hemisphere of the brain. That's a big intention with this work. And so yeah, I find often people who are creative can often be, drawn to using art therapy as an experience or as a way of healing. But also, I find people who've been through a lot of psychotherapy kind of reach out for maybe more holistic or alternative approaches that are still using, clinical approaches, but getting there in a different way. Right. So, because when we're telling our story, we're kind of reliving it. We're going over it and over it and over it. So when we're able to just pause that and allow expression to happen outside of ourselves and then talk about what's outside of ourselves, not what's right here, it just gives us that space. It's also, our therapy is very helpful too when we're trying to express something that's ineffable, something without words, which is psychedelics, right? At the heart of psychedelics, there's often no words to describe what our experience has been. And so using creativity can be a real help there. And, if we look too at cave drawings and the ways that indigenous people over, thousands and thousands of years have expressed their experience with these non-ordinary states of consciousness, we see that in the artwork that was created, in the ceremonies created, in the dances created. So creativity and art in particular has always been a part of these non-ordinary state experiences as a way to integrate and understand and make meaning of them.
I love that. And I'm wondering, I'm picturing here, like I'm trying to make some correlates to, like you said, the other types of therapy. And I'm thinking about, I see patients in the ketamine clinic, they come in every time and fill out their PHQ-9, and we can see week to week, does it go up, does it go down? Is there an equivalent in art therapy where when you first start working with them, you have their initial art pieces, and then as you continue to work with them, you can see a progression or a change that gives you information about how their journey is going?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm always tracking, right, with my clients, and what I'll do often, because what is created is so powerful in the art. The artwork itself is powerful. So what we do with the art afterwards is just as important as the creation itself. So what I invite clients to do, they can take their art home if they choose, or if I'm working with them online, right? It's important what they do with it afterwards, that it's not just laying, on the sofa table, laying around. But after maybe, 6 sessions, or maybe 10, depending on who I'm working with and what we're working with, at a certain point, we'll take all the artwork and have an art show. And it's just me and the client, where we're going through each piece and looking at the shifts and changes that have happened. Because I find that's key in therapy. We really need to acknowledge where we were and where we're at now for the healing to take root. So yeah, we'll do that at the end, is have a little art show and just reflect on what was happening at that time, what supported you after creating this. Is this a piece you brought home? Did you look at it afterwards or journal with it after? So yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. This has been so informative. I'm even thinking about, patients that have come to me and saying, like, I'm so over talk therapy. Like, I've talked and talked and talked, and nothing has moved the needle. And so sometimes I'll be like, how about somatic therapy? But I'm really excited now to have this, as now that I am well informed about what art therapy is, as for maybe our more creative patients. Hey, have you thought about art therapy? So, and I'm sure there are lots of listeners out there who might feel like in that same boat of like, oh, this is another way that I could, because again, like you said, that the talking, there are sometimes for certain people limits, and maybe it's just not getting all the way there, or they're maybe just tired of telling their story in a certain way, and it would be easier to get it out like in the art way, or somatically, like you said, as your work combines both of those. So I truly appreciate you coming on. Can you please share with the listeners where they can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. They can find me on my website, which is centeroftheheart.com, spelled CENTRE. So a place you go rather than the middle of something. And yeah, I offer trainings on how to use art with psychedelics, art therapy with psychedelics, as well as, yeah, there's links to my book too that just came out through Routledge, as well as another book I've done. So, or if anyone's wanting extra support, yeah, that's where you can go to book a session too. So it's been such a
Excellent.
pleasure being with you here. And
Oh,
thank you for inviting me on.
the feeling is very mutual. A big thank you goes out to Christina who connected us.
Yeah.
And yes, truly appreciate this. And yes, everybody check out her website and her book. And for everybody else out there, until next time.